Welcome Wargamers. In today's video, we're going to be exploring the Moonclan Grots. How they fit into the gloomspite Gits army, how they go to war, a deep dive into the various units that compose the faction, and more. But understand as we dive into the various units like that, they don't all have the exact same amount of lore. Some are very brief, some are kind of more expounded upon. But we're going to talk about everything that's in the battle tome. I want to start off by talking about how they fit into gloomspite Gits, like the entirety of the faction itself. And the Moonclan Grots make up the vast bulk of the army. They are the most numerous in terms of straight body count. They dwell in the dark tunnels and caves that flood the mortal realms. These can be things like simple mountain passages or vast tunnel networks known as lurk lairs. All of their homes are shrouded in utter darkness, damp, covered in fungus and shrooms. They are so sensitive to the light, in fact, that it will burn in complete daylight. While in those caves, they often spend their time breeding squigs, which is another cave-dwelling species we'll talk about in a little bit, refining, consuming, growing, and using chemistry, or rudimentary chemistry we'll say, on all manner of toxins, fungi, mold, anything that they can find growing within their environment. And to give you a sense of what the faction is like, this really is the most religious, fanatic type of follower of Gorka Morka. If we think of something like the devoted of Sigmar, which is the sort of the church's army, the devoted zealots of their god, throwing themselves mercilessly into combat with zero armor, zero training, they just are so fanatical and zealous, they just charge at the enemy. This is exactly that same type of deal, except with Gorka Morka rather than Sigmar. And as they've kind of proliferated throughout the realms, occasionally their cave networks will accidentally burrow into a fire slayer lodge or some other subterranean culture. There's quite a few cultures that reside underneath the earth itself. And wars of unimaginable scale will take place underground, and no one will ever know because it's so deep down there. And I just find that idea entertaining to me, much like the rest of this faction where they're very small packages of epicness, right? They all think they have grandiose visions of destruction and glory. It's a small package that actually doesn't matter. Much like their wars, even though they are massive in scale, most of the time no one actually knows they happen. In these deep caves and lurk lairs, oftentimes a leader will rise up, right? This is a cunning Git with the desire to wreak some havoc on the world above. So he goes to a group of Moonclan Grots, and he promises them riches, killing, and fun. Likewise, he can just as easily threaten them, bribe them, or kill their leader and kind of assume his command. Now, when that enterprising young Grot does this a few times, meaning he has a few units beneath him, they form what's known as a skull mob. This is a gang of destruction that can be a few dozen to several hundred Grots. And they pop up across the surface, and they raid, pillage, and destroy for a bit of fun, and also to gather resources. Things like cloth, wood, steel, to make their crude weapons and things like that. As these raids continue and evolve, it becomes easier and easier for that leader Grot to kind of get more units to follow him. He can coerce and bully more mobs into joining his party. If it gets big enough, he can even invite a shaman, like a wizard, on board. And his whole warband snowballs even larger. And here's the thing, within a lurk lair, because these tunnel networks, these civilizations are so vast, there can be dozens of these groups at any given time at various stages of growth within that kind of snowball effect. So that's really to show you how big these kind of clans, these cultures can be, even within one kind of gloomspite Gits region. Well, heck, and even as your warband, I guess for a lack of a better term, your skull mob grows, you can start inviting different kinds of units to join you because they'll be beneficial to it. So like squig herders and riders will hear you're having a good time and they'll want to join in too. When it gets big enough, it becomes something called a scrap, which really is the kind of next level. More than a warband, this is like a true warrior party here. This really represents all the martial forces that a Moonclan lurk lair has. The best of the best, the loon bosses, the most powerful shaman, they can rally up several skull mobs, spider raiders, Troggoth herds, everything. It's the level where you stop organizing as Moonclan Grots and you start organizing as the full army, right? Gloomspite Gits in totality. It can, but doesn't need to, incorporate everything at their disposal. And while raids and attacks can really happen anytime, a full scrap is a special occasion, right? Because it's like an annihilation level event. It represents thousands of grots, spiders, and troggoths marching direct under the leadership of very, very key grots. It could be a loon boss with a cohort of shaman. It could be a shaman leading with his couple of select champions who are the loon bosses. It's a very fluid structure, but it represents all hands on deck in whatever context that looks like for what your army is built to represent. And that's really it for the bulk of the Moonclan lore that we have. There's this definite slant towards religious devotion and numerical superiority that kind of saturates all of their lore. But we're going to transition to talking about the units, which is really going to make up the bulk of this video. And because frankly, there isn't a ton of lore on them each. However, each one of these units has a ton of character. And one thing I also want to touch on here is that the bosses, or all the heroes for this battle tome, I'm going to do a special video talking about them. And I do that for a few reasons. One, if we do it now, there's no context for them, meaning if I were to start with that, you wouldn't kind of understand like what a basic Moonclan Grot is, and so their leaders would kind of be lost on you. But also because, frankly, there's a ton of units in the Moonclan Grot section. There's a ton of leaders, so just for time's sake and being able to make sure the information is very digestible, I split it up. So starting at the bottom, the lowest level, we're talking about the Moonclan Grots themselves. And this is the basic and numerous troop in the army. They number in the hundreds to tens of thousands, depending on your lurk layer. They stand a little shorter than your average man, and they don't have much physical strength, but they make up for that in sheer numbers. So, if you understand this, a basic grot is incredibly selfish, conniving, greedy, spiteful, and cowardly, but in numbers, their confidence goes way up, and they flood the enemy with a wave of cackling laughs, leering eyes, spears, bows, whatever they have on hand. It's important to note, as we talk about all the other grot units and also the leaders in a different video, the shortcomings of a grot never go away. They're always these tiny maniacal things that just cackle with laughter and have grandiose visions of the glory of being a grot in a very tiny, weak, frail package. Some Moonclan Grots will wield spears, these are called stabas, and some use bows to shoot from afar, these are called shootas. But in either case, they can often wield nets that'll kind of tear the enemy down, pin him to the ground so that the rest of the Grots can get in some extra jabs with whatever weapon they're wielding. And they often have banners to inspire and coordinate, and the kind of power of the bad moon and destruction itself will even see arrows deflected and things like that. So those roles really do come through in their war scrolls. However, as the casualties mount, their confidence breaks, and the unit will often fall apart to backstab another day. So numbers are a key thing. Again, I talked about that. All these lore entries, numbers are always a reinforced concept. Next up are the sneaky snufflers, and this is the first of the new additions to the army we'll be talking about. The arrival of the Bad Moon is heralded, as we talked about yesterday, by the growth of a strange mushroom called the loon cap mushroom. These are incredibly powerful ingredients for a number of potions, and they're highly sought after by shamans and other heroes. Well, when the Bad Moon comes, the earth is covered in them, right? Like whatever ground, earth, meaning literally the ground itself, is just they burst forth from the firmament, right? All over the place, loon cap mushrooms. The caves themselves will swell with the life of the loon caps, ushering the grots outward. And understand these loon cap mushrooms, they can be the size of a thumbnail or a tree. So due to their importance, a special kind of squig, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, was bred to basically hunt them out. Thus, the snuffle squigs were born, which is a traditional squig, which we'll describe in a minute again, but it has a massive nose on the front of them to be able to seek out loon cap mushrooms on the battlefield. Also important that they pounce on the enemies who get too close to them. So they're kind of bred to be this fiercely territorial thing, but what they're doing is trying to find their territory, meaning find the loon cap mushrooms. Now, in the course of doing their job, as they're kind of sniffing through the dark caverns and the darker, unforgotten places of the realms, they often find little secret passages, and so that is kind of your lore reason for why they can pop up on the battlefield, or pretty much wherever they want. So they're kind of seeking out loon caps and then are kind of drawn to the battlefield, oftentimes sneaking up behind the enemy. Now to transition into my absolute favorite set of models here. This is going to be the Fanatics. There's two different kinds of Fanatics here. There's the Loon Smasher Fanatics. And realistically, here's how you make a Loon Smasher Fanatic, okay? You get a grot at varying levels of willingness. They don't have to want to do this. But you pump him full of a fungus brew that really just roids him out. As I've mentioned multiple times that Moonclan Grots, or really just all Grots in general, are extremely weak and cowardly. But you give him super strength, immunity to damage basically, but it makes his mind go in a berserk rage. He goes absolutely crazy, and right as he's kind of roiding out, going full Grot Hulk, if you will, you immediately stick him with some spider venom that makes him go paralyzed. So you become stiff as a board and falls over. Next, a team will come, they'll wrap him in chains and stuff him in a bag and carry him to war as part of the Moonclan Grot unit. During the battle, either they'll give him anti-venom or it'll just wear off. They attach a huge chain ball to him and set him loose upon the enemy. And it's amazing. This is how you get the Grots that just have their big, huge wrecking balls attached to them. That's how they're able to spin around, as they're all hopped up on all kinds of fungus brew that are basically turning them into a one-man wrecking crew. In the actual game mechanics, you don't set them up on the battlefield. You declare that you're hiding them in a unit, and then that unit throws them out during the game. And this is their kind of lore explanation for that. Basically, you chain them up, and that unit has carried this insane, super strong Grot with them into battle. So right off the bat, this thing does not have a good retirement plan, right? Because these guys die 100% of the time. But while you're dying, you get to live the Grot dream. You have super strength, people are petrified of you, and you're doing insane amounts of damage. And that is why Loon Smasher Fanatics are incredible. But also with them are the Spore Splatter Fanatics. And this is another new unit that was added to the Battle Tome. If you have the kit for Loon Smasher Fanatics, this is an alternate build for them. It follows the same concept as the last entry, but it's far less, in theory, suicidal. One genius Grot, apparently in history, got the idea to attach a spore called the Thwackweezer Puff Shroom to a chain. This is a common fungus found in caves. It's like under beds, behind doors, things like that. Places where things don't get touched very much. And when you do touch this particular type of spore, it releases a lung-clogging cloud of miasma. And it's great for practical jokes or spiteful assassinations within the drama of a particular lurk lair. Well, when you get a big one and you put it on a chain, something remarkable happens. The puff shroom is taken into battle itself, thrown upon the ground, and a colossal cloud of spores erupts. And it's so big and so dense and so such a good line of sight blocking cloud that I can actually hide entire skull mobs behind it. Because you can't hit what you can't see. And this does a few things. On one hand, this huge cloud, first of all, like I said, it creates sort of a pseudo wall across the battlefield. The enemy can't see your skull mob. And these spores that the Moonclan Grots are so used to, it kind of invigorates them simply because it's the kind of environment they're used to breathing in their cave. Remember, this is all happening outside a cave typically. And the third thing that happens is that the cloud chokes and gags whatever enemy they're facing because they're not used to it. So it's a really practical use of something that naturally occurs in their environment. And this is a theme we'll see quite a bit. It's the weaponization of naturally occurring things. And now we move into a fan favorite, and that is, of course, the squigs. To do that, I kind of want to describe what a squig is for people who don't have the long history of loving them in fantasy battles and things like that. So what it is, it's a cave-dwelling bipedal organism. It kind of looks like Pac-Man if he had two small legs. That is to say, he's a giant sphere that's like 90% mouth with two little legs. They are incredibly springy, able to jump incredible distances. They are very random, vicious things. What makes them important is that they are often found in mountain cave systems where these kind of Moonclan Grot societies are existing, but they're very easy to breed, which is very important. In fact, they can be bred to make specific purposes, like, to excel at a very specific thing. We've already met the Snuffle Squig earlier, who was bred for having an incredible sense of smell to find loon caps. Well, as the Moonclan dwelt in these caves, these became the animals to domesticate. And I put domesticate in some pretty heavy air quotes because they're still wild and insane. But to the Moonclan Grots, they are used as mounts, service animals, workhorses, food, etc. And then here's the thing about squigs is that they will grow to incredible sizes. Just straight up incredible size. If you don't believe me, go to the Forge World website and look at the Colossal Squig. I promise it lives up to its name. So now that we've kind of defined what they are, let's kind of see how they fit into the army. And so the first one we have is the Squig herds. Again, this is the lowest level of what a squig can be in a military context. And it really is exactly what it sounds like. While some squigs are bred in iron cages, many are captured and herded into these very random collections, I guess you could say, and when the time is right, they are unleashed upon the enemy. They stand near the height of a human with a bite powerful enough to chomp through stone. And when they kind of throw themselves at you, they are a truly chaotic horde. I don't mean chaos, of course, in the dark faction sense. I mean literally like unpredictable, undefendable against, that kind of thing when I say chaotic. And occasionally a few will break free from their herd, kind of the dens they're kept in, and wreak havoc on the grots. And that's, a risk that most loon bosses are willing to take because their effectiveness far outweighs the risk of having them around. So now let's talk about squig hoppers. So we have these beasts. How do we weaponize them even further? Well, here's a great way to do it. You take some puff gut or hop splatter fungus. These are actual names that are in the battle tome. And you feed them to squigs. Now what these do is they make them incredibly gassy, and so the squigs will actually grow bigger, but as a side effect they'll become more springy. They jump exceedingly greater distances. Side note, it does make them far more irritable. Okay, so you just made them better in combat, so now it's a wonder as to why any grot would ever want to ride one, but some maniacs do. Many of them are eaten for their troubles, but the craziest ones, the craziest grots I mean, know how to hold on. Thus, a weirdly effective cavalry was born, where it's one of these grots that's bloated up with gas, they're able to jump incredible distances, and they hurl themselves straight at the enemy. They throw themselves directly at the forefront of the enemy's army, thrashing around as a squig, and the rider is riding on his back with his knife pulled, trying to stab and slash as he can. Now, here's the thing I want to talk about here, is that this is not a bonding relationship. This is almost like a cheap transportation device. There's not even like a saddle or anything like that. It's just the squig being riled up, kind of given a brew to make them more bouncy and mobile, and then a grot will just hold on for dear life on the back of him. So it's not truly a mount, he's just kind of along for the ride. And I love pointing this out because so many of these battle tomes, when people, or factions I should say, have mounts, they always go into great depth about the bonding ritual, or how, in this case, like a grot would revere the squig. They don't. It's nothing like that. They're a tool. They are a piece of their society that is vital, but there's not like an emotional attachment here. They are a means to an end. So I always like to put those in because I think those contrasts are very important. Now, sort of the next level of that, I guess you could call them in quotes the elite variant of the squig hopper, is the Boyne Grot Bounders. And these are made up of grots who survive a couple rounds riding the squigs. Right, if you're a squig hopper long enough, you'll kind of become naturally a Boyne Grot Bounder. What it really is they begin to kind of develop this like overconfidence in their ability to ride. They think they're these great squig masters, and they kind of get this bravado and swagger. And strangely enough, the squig kind of respond to it, and they just don't eat them, right? This kind of like shameful arrogance of like, no squig would ever eat me. Somehow the squigs just kind of don't. And so it's kind of a fun thing that they kind of put in there where it's like, no one can really explain this, but it just kind of happens. And so this kind of unique relationship grows where they become very comfortable on the back of a squig, which is a very unique thing. There are very few of these. And when you're comfortable on the mount, you can actually start practicing like how to actually fight. Because before, if you look at the actual models of squig hoppers, they just look like they're holding on for dear life, right? Almost like they were tied to it. Whereas the Boyne Grot Bounders seem very confident in their poses. They look like they're ready to deliver blows. They've been practicing. They've had time to develop their martial prowess. It really does translate pretty well with the model, and in lore it makes perfect sense. They arm themselves with a crude lance, and they charge at the biggest, baddest elements of the enemy army. They have an increased focus on tactics. They make fantastic line breakers. They can even be flanking forces because they can better guide the squigs to go to the right combats. And the last unit in today's video, by far one of the most iconic for the entire army, is the Mangler squigs. And it's a simple idea. Remember I said before that squigs can grow to become massive. Well, when squigs get too big to ride, they'll often be kind of curled into what's called the Mangler squig. What it is you take two giant squigs, you chain them together, and you throw them at the enemy. In tandem, it's a pair of wrecking balls that pull each other around, because one will spin and it'll whip the other like a mace. But then you amplify that by they're both moving. They're both in perpetual, irritated motion, because they're both jumping, biting, scraping, fighting everywhere around them. Now, in an effort to guide the creatures, a few grots will go ahead and tie themselves to the backs. But really they're just there to give very basic directions, because once they close in on the enemy, there is zero control. The Mangler squig will whip, smash, crush, chew, and thrash everything around it. And they're kind of sent in there to die, because at this point they're so big they're kind of hard to manage, or at least guide and use effectively. And so in its death throes, they're still killing everything around them. So it is a suicide mission, but it's an incredibly devastating one. And as I conclude all these videos, why are the Moonclan Grots cool? Of course, this is barring their leaders, which we'll touch on because they lead all the other sub-factions we'll talk about as well. But as I said in yesterday's video, this faction fits into the realms so perfectly, and this range only exemplifies that. The weapons they wield, the potions, the brews, everything, all the animals they ride, it comes from their environment. It's the stuff what the caves look like. Their society was largely in isolation with a single creature and its specific biome. From that, they mastered that creature, breeding, mounts, food, the squig, etc. The natural fungi and growths were cultivated and worked into the society at every level. Moonclan Grots are the denizens of the dark caves, and every part of their culture and warfare reflects that. The beasts, the shrooms, the tattered cloth, the crew weapons, physique. A few other armies give me that sense, that when you look at them, you immediately understand where they come from and how they survive. And I'll say this as purely opinion, that this is probably where most of the character in the range comes from. Spiderfang Grots and Troggoths offer us so much, and I don't want to minimize them at all because they're incredible looking models. But it's the teeming masses, it's the brew-filled fanatics, the bounding squigs that are kind of the spirit of the Grots. It's madness. You get to play as insanity on the battlefield, and it's incredible. And friends, those are my thoughts on the Moonclan Grots, and I would absolutely love to hear what you find most exciting about them. First of all, which of the models, the new kits that came out for this, is your favorite? I'm going to put myself out there and say the classic update, the classic Fanatic kit that was updated with the new sculpts is incredible. Absolutely love it. But I want to hear yours, and I want to hear lore-wise which of these stuck out to you the most. We'll be back tomorrow talking all about the Spiderfang, and I look forward to seeing you there. Have a wonderful day, and happy wargaming.